So Dave, thanks for joining us again, second time on Tal as well. So this time, because we're in the midst of a global pandemic, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about online learning and maybe talk about different practical approaches to doing online learning, and maybe talk about a little bit about generally. I suppose I could begin by asking you about the difference between immediate and immediate teaching. I mean, because the last time you were on the podcast, we were talking about sort of pedagogy, and you were, I think what we discussed was the idea that sort of a good pedagogical encounter in some way has to be an event. But now, so face-to-face teaching is present, it's embodied, it's immediate, whereas online teaching is in some way mediate. It's mediated by, media. Do you think that's a fair way of thinking about it, or do you think that's a useful distinction?
I think it's a useful starting point for thinking about it. I think there are quite a lot of things, and we'll perhaps discuss some of these, that overlap between face-to-face teaching and remote and online teaching and various forms of that. But I think there are things that are different about it as well that we'll kind of get to. So yes, it is more mediated, but even in a face-to-face situation, it's kind of mediated by cultural expectations about appearance and about what educational practices and things. So there are different sets of socio-cultural expectations on online teaching as there are to face-to-face teachings, and there are technical mediations as well. So I think the differences between them are partly to do with what the medium brings into that, what the limitations, the form and things bring into it, but also what expectations we as both tutors and students bring to our use of technology. Technology is not merely the kind of wires and cables, but the kind of socially constructed aspects around the use of technology will have a real impact on how, and I think people are starting to see this already, on how their behaviours shift in the kind of distance context.
Okay, so what type of behavioural shifts, say, could we expect in an online environment?
Yeah, I think it depends what kind of thing we do when we mean online environment, because I think that's perhaps where we might start. In some sense, is that there's not just one way of doing things. There's not like one way of doing it, and then a bunch of different tools that you choose from, whichever is most inexpensive or available. And there are a variety of different tools that we might use to do that, sure. But actually, what I think some people, when they've leapt into this remote teaching, when the university announced we're moving to online teaching because of closing the campus because of the virus, a lot of people have made an assumption, perhaps, that what we need to do is to replicate as closely as possible the lecture experience. But that isn't necessarily the same. So depending on what medium or what kind of option we go with, it will influence what kind of behavioural shifts you refer to. So I think the common presumption amongst people who've not done much online teaching is that we replicate it straight away by having it as a broadcast model. So a rather conservative pedagogy of a lecture is a broadcast. It's somebody standing at the front broadcasting out to the many people sat there. Not that different from a broadcast model of, say, a television programme. Kind of newsreader sits in a studio and tells people things, and the people sat in front of their TVs. So if you've got that kind of model of face-to-face pedagogy, you might well presume that an online pedagogy is just a shifted version of that. Instead of you being in the classroom, you're in your kitchen or wherever. You might be you're in a kind of house, and then your students are in front of their screens rather than sat in rows, and there's no real difference. I think even if we have that rather kind of limited conservative pedagogical approach to a kind of broadcast model of education, even if we had that, there'd be a different shift, a different kind of behaviours, where the live event is somewhat mediated differently. But of course, this is also an opportunity, I guess, for people to reflect on the fact that that's not how many of us really teach anyway. Not only, even when we do, say, broadcast a big lecture, it's much more interactive. So even when I was in a room, say if I was teaching 60 students in a lecture type setting, and I was walking back and forth, pontificating about philosophy and saying wise words and various things, this is what happens. I would also be, I hope, reading the room a little bit, in the sense that anyone who's involved in a kind of live performance would notice whether people were paying any the slightest attention, whether things were going, whether they were all looking at me deeply confused, or some of them were nodding and were kind of engaging. So there's a kind of a whole bunch of subtle interactions we engage with without necessarily even noticing, that allow us to adjust our pacing, to think, look, they're really not getting that topic. I'm going to have to go back over it and give a couple of more examples. Even so, therefore, when you're just doing a lecture, there's all that stuff that is happening in a face-to-face context is taken out in an online context. So when I've done the past online broadcast type lecture models, sometimes when I've been traveling, my previous institution, I would go back and still teach my class while I was away. And in that, I think that means that you have to do, so if you've got a chat box running as well as your video you're telling everybody through, you have to do activities quite often to check people are paying attention, check people are with you, check people you're not losing people, even if it's giving everyone in the class 2 minutes to write one sentence to summarize, just even if it's really quite straightforward, but it stops them kind of drifting off. But it also gives you at least a partial replacement for some of that face-to-face feedback you get in the kind of more embodied context.
I think we're only talking about one very particular type of online learning there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that is live events. So that seems to be a lot of the debate that's going on at the moment. So we're all grappling with this at the moment. Already, I would imagine a lot of our colleagues would have been using versions of online learning, like virtual learning rooms, like, Blackboard or Moodle or Now or whatever. But I suppose what I've been seeing is there is a debate surrounding the difference between synchronous and asynchronous online learning, and that might be a useful way to help us think about different styles of online learning, because there seems to be a bit of a debate. I see lots of friends on social media and colleagues saying synchronous is much better because people are present and it's live, and I guess you said they can replicate the on-campus experience, and other people are saying no, asynchronous is better because they are, well, there's a variety of reasons, because it's with synchronous learning, there might be logistical problems, or people might have bandwidth, or people might be in different time zones or whatever. So I suppose that's roughly a good place to think about different styles of online learning, to sync or not to sync, Dave.
Well, absolutely. I think that the model I was talking about absolutely is very much a synchronous model where everything's happening at once. There's a live event, everyone dials in and watches it. The halfway house for some people is making sure that any live events are completely recorded and they can be reviewed and things of this sort. And there is the tendency for many of us who've taught for a few years to think of the live event as the thing in itself, and everything else around it is packaging. So we think of the virtual learning environment with its supporting readings, the prep work that students do before class, looking at some materials, doing questions. So everything else is kind of the before and after the thing itself, the teaching. So we end up with this kind of philosophic, this kind of ontological distinction, if you want, between the teaching itself, the live thing, and then all the peripheral stuff which supports that and makes that more valuable. And I think anyone who really thinks a lot about how people learn finds that problematic. Anyway, but thinking about it in this context helps us think that it's much more problematic. So we may want to think that we may want to have a synchronous element within our practice for some students, but we need to take into account that it won't always work. It won't always work for people and all those things. And one of the other things that's useful about asynchronous learning that I've certainly found, where it isn't a live event, where you put a set of materials up and people interact with them in a variety of ways. So I guess an example of this asynchronous thing would be a chat forum where people go and post on it over 48 hours.
So like a discussion board or something like that?
Yeah, a discussion board rather than a live chat. So a synchronous live chat, everyone's talking in the 1 hour slot. Whereas an asynchronous version would be, I'd say, an old-fashioned discussion board. But that allows people time to go and think. It allows people in different time zones to access it in different ways. There are a lot of benefits to that. And I've seen also mentioned on social media and the like yourself, people worrying about students' anxiety, and that this is a very stressful time for lots of people. So there might be times when they're not feeling up to engaging. If their only chance to learn the thing is that 1 hour a week, and that's an hour they're not having a great hour, then they've lost it. Also, people are, because of things like closure of schools, changes of services, people have different and complex caring responsibilities. So they might normally be free at Monday on 2 o'clock. All of a sudden, they've got a child at home, they've got a relative who they need to provide food to and drive to, whatever it might be. So we can't necessarily rely on the live event in all sorts of sort of external ways that are unique to the situation. So I think it might be arguable that we might still have some hankering after a live event, and there might be some benefits to that. But that needs to be part of a kind of broader strategy for the program, of course, for whatever kind of learning would happen. And not to think that if someone doesn't make the live event, they miss the thing itself, the main thing. So the asynchronous things you can do is partly about things like discussion boards. But if you can still have things like bits of video, they just don't have to be live. There's nothing stopping people up to their homes from making a whole series of short 5-minute bits of video and place them on the Moodle, Blackboard, whatever, VLE site that you're using. And that also allows people who've got rather limited bandwidth to just access the elements they want to.
Or download later, yeah.
Absolutely. Or maybe if they're in a position where they've got a bunch of Wi-Fi, they can download those files. And then if they're off-site later or on at another different location, or whatever it might be, they've then got that to look at. So I think it's about thinking, how can we kind of bring some of the benefits of that live event, like a short bit of video, and link it then with sort of asynchronous things where people have to all make a response to two of the points in the short video over a 48-hour period. And then the tutor can kind of hold back on that and then write some kind of response to it and set some more tasks.
So in your experience then, what do you think would be good examples of asynchronous online learning?
Well, I think the problem many of us worry about is having the students be too passive in online learning generally. And it looks like basically we just dump stuff into their brains via the internet. We're sat with our great wisdom in our kitchen and we dump down the tubes directly into their heads. And most of us really on reflection think that doesn't ever happen. It's not how I learn. I've been trying to learn Spanish like that for about 10 years. And I still speak both. So I only really learn it when I'm actually forced to engage in the more challenging, painful work of talking to people in Spanish. Things. So we know that there's lots of evidence about kind of how active learning operates and how effective that is in lots of ways. So I think what we want to do is to find activities which aren't just giving students things to read, aren't just giving them things to watch, but making them not only just do stuff, but engage with either ourselves or with each other. I think one of the great concerns at the moment for people who are kind of self-isolating in a way is the sense of isolation. So I think what would work well in the current context is getting students to talk to each other, giving students tasks, asynchronous tasks, saying, by next Wednesday, I would like this group to prepare a PowerPoint with audio recording over the top, whatever. I would like this group to prepare that. And the group has to communicate with each other using whatever tools, be it WhatsApp, be it Microsoft Teams or whatever it might be, to produce a bit of content. They can put it on Google Drive and all share it and edit it collectively, edit it at the same time. But that, I think, gives them a connection with each other, and then it also gives them an output for the other students to watch and view. So you could easily, if you're doing, just thinking of some of the work you and I are involved in, students who are studying philosophy, you could give them a journal article, a bunch of third-year students, and say, look, there's 9 pages of this, there's 9 groups of 3 students. I want you to prepare a kind of a summary of that page. What are they talking about in this? What's going on? And I'll give them some options around how to produce it, some bits of audio, some bits of PowerPoint, whatever. And then at the end of that, the group has got a whole summary of the whole piece that they've all collectively produced as a team. So I think you can almost end up with kind of, especially if it's unassessed and therefore it doesn't feel like high stakes, you've got some sense in which they all feel they're kind of doing something collectively that's of value that they all get to benefit from retaining at the end, rather than just make work, just making work up because you don't know what else to do.
Yes, so it sounds like some good Deweyan pedagogy there, that the best form of learning is task-based learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the thing about that is that one of the problems of asynchronous learning for some people is that it's too open. And just access stuff when you feel like it, have a bit of a look when you think, maybe make a couple of comments. It doesn't feel very structured. Whereas a live event is, exactly where the boundaries are around it. So I think more so perhaps than even in the classroom, structuring people's activity, making very clear what people have to do, when exactly, really helps with that kind of active learning. There was a whole bunch of things written earlier this year, I think it's maybe from Elon University, about the effect of much more structure in face-to-face seminars having a really noticeably good effect on inclusivity. That people tend to close various attainment gaps when you structured seminar activities in classrooms much more. And I was really struck by that anyway, thinking that we might, when I was a student, you remember back in the previous century or two, when I was a student, some of my philosophy lecturers would give us an hour lecture from memory, which meant just making it up. They would talk about kind of Sartre.
Our secret is out, Dave.
Yeah, they would smoke at the front and talk about Sartre and wander about, and then they would kind of put their cigarette out at the end of the kind of hour and say, "Okay, we've got an hour now. Any questions? No, good," and they'd be off to the pub. But
those were the days.
Yeah, you can't get away with such a, there's a lot of smoking in the classroom. But even now, I think there's still some tutors in some university contexts who would have a dissimilar approach to seminars. So we've all done the reading, what do you think? Rather than having much more structure. So I think many of us were trying to encourage colleagues to use more structure in seminars in a face-to-face context anyway. And people can argue about how much of that is too much. Some tutors thought it was an acceptable insult, I think, to say, refer to that kind of activity as too much like school. It's too schooly. I'm not sure that's actually the insult you think it is.
Well, it's I suppose, David, it's the old fear of rote learning as not really useful for generating productive learning encounters.
Yeah, absolutely. In a sense, you would want the very structured, say, seminar activities to also have lots of opportunity for being creative and would not, in a sense, be, in many ways, wouldn't be rote learning. And that they'd be about kind of it being student-led a lot of the time. But having more, so the kind of work I've been doing more recently has been having slightly more structure to those, like to allow everybody's voice to be heard in a variety of ways. And they want to understand what it is they're meant to be doing and things. So when we move that to online, I think we can see how the benefit of it. And certainly my experience of online teaching has been that students will eventually all join in. Sometimes they're very quiet initially. You have a group where nobody engages for ages. But I think the more structure you can place into interactive activities, the more you get engagement. But I think that can work for asynchronous as well. So it's not just for a live session where you would give them 5 minutes to write a sentence or all of them generate a question in a 10-minute block or whatever. But for asynchronous thing, you can say, okay, let's say synchronous. Well, that doesn't mean it's any time. You might say, really, this is going to be a 3-day activity. It's actually going to take you an hour or 2 hours. But at some point during the next 3 days, you will all contribute 2 hours worth of interaction with it and be quite specific about what you would expect them to do for how long. So rather than saying, I'd like you all to write a reaction to what is it like to be a bat, something came to mind, the Nagel paper, rather than saying, I'd like you all to react to it, because some students might write 10 pages, some might write a paragraph, is be really specific. What are you asking them to react to? For how long? How much time do you expect them? Do you expect them to read another thing? So I think, given that they're not there to ask you questions, sometimes, and that they may not want to ask you questions, particularly if it's a public forum, they can see each other's answers. And that specificity saves them from feeling stupid or they don't understand. So say very clearly, I'd like a paragraph each on this one idea. And that is, in a sense, rote learning. It requires a kind of input from them. But I think, in my experience as a student as well, being maximally clear with people what the expectation is, what you want from them, what the load on them is.
So specifics are going to be really important in this new environment that we are in, where all universities are delivering online learning. Absolutely.
I think students and staff, many of us are feeling very dislocated in this context because we can't do our normal stuff. Some people sitting at home is their normal stuff. But many of us, we can't engage in our normal daily activities. Everyone's feeling kind of ill at ease in a whole variety of ways. And many of us people might be feeling a bit adrift and at sea, and that they're, people are saying, well, I'm still at work, but I don't know what day it is. In quite the same way, maybe it's that period between New Year and Christmas where people lose track of the day. So I think in that context of people, the days kind of merge into each other where people aren't able to use the normal patterns of routine and things to regulate their lives, which many of us rely on. And it's very good for many people's mental health and things, is that, well, the learning stuff we're going to do with them is a chance to introduce some real structure anyway. So I think it's beneficial in a variety of ways. But I think we also need to think that if we're going to have to take seriously student learning in this context, we're not just doing it because we don't want them to complain about not having what they're paid for. We actually really care about this actually working. It needs to be really goal-based. We need to think we need to think about, all those things we normally talk about, like learning outcomes and what it is that by the end of this course students will have got. And think, okay, that's what we're going to ask us. We're going to have to think back through a series of steps and sessions and think exactly how we're going to achieve this for students who we're not going to see in person, who we're not going to necessarily talk to on the phone individually. The scope and scale of things may make that impossible. So I think structure is something that gives people a bit of a gift, both to the tutor and the students anyway, in the sort of current context of feeling so discombobulated by the kind of routine of life being thrown around in all sorts of ways. But also from a kind of pedagogical point of view, I think that real clear structure of how to engage with that topic in depth and how to work through them is going to be greater than we did in the face-to-face context, even though I'm quite an advocate of more of it in a face-to-face context anyway.
In your experience, do you think that there is, well, the question is, I'd be interested in hearing you talk about is disciplinary specifics. In your experience, how mindful should we be of our different disciplines? I suppose colleagues will know what's best for their discipline, but I used to work for the Open University, and I remember perhaps apocryphal stories, but I'm pretty sure they're true. But back when the Open University started in the 60s, and they were leading online learning, or they're leading distance learning at least back then. Yeah. There was stories of them, for their science students sending out like kidneys live in the post and stuff like that, so that they could practice dissection. So I'm just wondering about how we can negotiate or nuance the disciplinary differences when we're thinking about, say asynchronous learning for now. Yeah,
well, I think there's been quite a lot of discussion of that amongst colleagues. So groups like the Association for Learning Technology and their kind of online lists and things have been talking in the last few days about maths, for example. So lots of these groups have been talking about the ways in which different disciplines require things. So in a sense, the kind of disciplines that you and I are involved in, say philosophy, sort of religion, things of this sort, are quite discursive.
Yeah, here's a PDF.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen to this 4-hour recording of me talking. Obviously fascinating.
Oh, sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's available at premium rates. So there is that kind of discursive type discipline we can do that. But then I think when we're thinking about the hard sciences, I don't think it's probably the right context to be sending medical samples to the post at the moment. Might have gone out so well. But of course, we've moved on, in a sense, from the very early OU days, in that we can now then things have like live broadcasts and things like that, or video recording. If you've got some tools as some of the kind of hard sciences, they will create things like virtual experiments, there will be bits of software where they can kind of create interactive things where you could dissect a kidney virtually. I know. The thing is that those kind of things, to be any good, can't be written in an afternoon. They normally require some technical skill and disciplinary knowledge and probably access to a kidney to record it, or at least a virtual context. So I think the hard sciences have got a lot of work to do, because we can, as long as we can facilitate a means by which we can converse with our students, we can do quite a lot. If I've given some of my students a sample from a PDF and some time and some structured questions, we can come back together and talk for a few hours, and everyone can walk away having had a really interesting experience, a useful learning experience. A lot of the hard sciences rely on people being able to access experimental experiments. For example, that's quite hard. Nonetheless, even those subjects, an awful lot of their work is also based on data analysis. So I think there are things people can do. People in the asynchronous context need to record things. They need to model things. They need to kind of get people doing more traditional research skills, like on topics, by going and looking at papers. I've noticed during the current issue a number of publishers making access to their materials less restricted than usual, and making more of their normally paywalled resources open to students. So students in, say, medical areas and things of this sort will be able to access research materials more easily from home than they might normally be able to do. So there are probably research-based tasks that the hard sciences can set, which, at least in the short term, can stand instead for some of their kind of more experimental physical interactions. I think you lose something by doing that, but I think disciplinary experts will work out some good, I think we can rely on how kind of creative university lecturers are. They're normally people are normally obsessed with their subject. That's why they've ended up doing this thankless but worthwhile task, and we can work in university. It's because they're really, really, really obsessed with whatever it might be, ridiculous, pointless German philosophy, whatever it might be. So they will probably really well engage with. They just often need some kind of ideas to help them get started, talking to people about how you might do it, and then normally people run with it and come up with creative things you've never thought of.
What has been gained by these online delivery formats, whatever they are, whether they're asynchronous, whether they're recording podcasts or making vidcasts? What, in your experience and in terms of your expertise, where do you see benefits for colleagues and for students?
Yeah, I'll go kind of biblical and start with the last thing. So I think starting with the student side of it, I think what students have sometimes lacked in the past is the ability to access materials in a more stop-start way on their own schedule. This has been particularly problematic for people who come to university with, say, specific learning difficulties or other responsibilities that meant they've missed sessions. So one of the consequences of this type of learning, which I hope will have a kind of afterburn effect and we'll see more of, is providing more asynchronous content. So if students don't get it that minute when the lecturer says it, they will have other opportunities. That might be to do some short video summaries, it might be do lecture recording, it might be do variety of this sort. But therefore, students having a variety of opportunities to learn the thing that they need to learn before they can move on with the subject and with their kind of understanding. I think that's really useful. I think giving students, therefore, being able to access material in a range of formats and presented in a variety of different ways, giving them these multiple learning opportunities, that's going to really going to have benefits for students. Some tutors are already doing that. There's a lot of the sector where people are starting to move that way anyway. This has meant that it's more blanket provision. For staff, thinking about that, I know I've been aware that many university staff are really anxious during this period, not merely just because of kind of health concerns and things of this sort, but also about what will this mean for the future of universities and the future of me as a teacher. Will we start to sort of close university campuses down anyway to save money, sell off buildings in high value locations, and we will have to teach from our kitchens forever? I don't see
holographs, David. Holographs.
Yeah,
holograms rather. Yeah, not holographs. Holograms.
Yes, weird holograms. It oddly kind of seems oddly pointless. When you can, I can't see what the benefit of a video is. But anyway, that's been a lack of imagination on my part. Yeah, I was just thinking teaching robots that have just my face skinned over the front seems completely fine. And also they can throw things and all sorts. And the hologram can't throw things.
How's that lecture so charming? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This is a bit of software, it's a subroutine. But I think people are concerned about that. What I think is interesting is what people are learning at the moment. I think a lot of people are having to learn a lot really fast and finding it really challenging. I think some universities are probably doing better than others at supporting those colleagues with tools and online training and online resources and things. A lot of people, I think, will find through necessity that they are reconsidering how they teach anyway. So maybe when people go back to face-to-face teaching, I think there's lots of reasons why people will go back to face-to-face teaching when it's available. Because I think the actual live event or bit of it is partly what lots of people do. There are lots of ways people could have done online learning instead of physically going to universities. And they're still going. Students still want to physically move to a different city and be in the room with someone who's as madly passionate about their subject as they are. That's something that really appealed. The idea of that is really kind of powerful and resonant with them. One can sit in kind of conversation with them. So I think there is that. But also, I think it will allow staff to consider, if I've got to deliver learning about various topics, is the face-to-face environment always the best way for everything? So rather than seeing all the other elements of the learning experience, we call that, as just padding around the thing itself, the live delivery, they might start to think actually that the various components all have different roles to play. So the bit of video recording, some interactive online activities in the Moodle site, or whatever it might be, and the live experience all have equal value and are not just kind of padding to them standing up and talking.
Sure.
So staff might get, and also hopefully staff, at least some staff, will get more competence with those things and start to find. And I think this often happens with kind of creative, intelligent people, is that they suddenly start using things in ways they weren't designed to be used. So you will see, I think you will see a lot of people kind of using online learning tools in ways that their creators didn't imagine they might use them that way. And I think that will be interesting to see what kind of lecturers, how much they start to mess about with, in a sense. I think most of us have been involved with technology a long time, have learned most of what we've learned through messing about with stuff and trying to break it, and then seeing if we can put it back together again. So I think we will see a lot of that with the kind of standard tools, people pushing the limits of what they can do, or just using them in different ways.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of that's the benefits. I suppose in terms of they're the pros. In terms of the cons, I suppose what strikes me as quite commonsensical. I mean, there's, there could be logistical problems around scheduling. There could be, sort of online learning, whether synchronous or asynchronous, to limit social interaction among students. I suppose, well, this might be a useful segue to talk about more synchronous forms of online learning, but student motivation might be difficult to gauge. As you said already, when you're in a class, you can you can always pick out the person who's looking at their crotch while clearly on their telephone, or people are fidgeting or getting bored or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a number of real dangers and risks about doing this. Why we haven't, some of the reasons we haven't already just all given up anyway and moved to online. If it was that good, we'd have done it anyway. So I think what a lot of us get from being on a university campus is we get a social interaction, a level of social interaction that's really important. I think, like many other people, I really like going to work. I like
Jesus.
Obviously, I'm not going there for free. Don't let that out. But there are bits that I like a bit, so I don't know. But the one thing I do like is the social interaction. I think people often don't admit how much they like knowing the people who work in all elements of the institution and having relationships with them and talking to them. And of course, the traditional British way of that is using the opportunity to complain about everything with a whole range of people all day long. And so the opportunity, losing that is disastrous. How can you complain to the security staff and then the shop staff and the library staff about how awful it is to be there? So I think there's a whole bunch of social stuff that we don't even notice that we're engaged in until we're not having the opportunity to do so. So I think that can really affect our motivation. It can really affect how good people feel about themselves or about their kind of context. And often when it's working well in a student context, students support each other, they motivate each other. Yeah, if you have a good kind of culture, I guess, in your kind of classes, they will kind of constantly boost each other's motivation, especially one of them's feeling a bit low or not really what it's all about, or maybe I don't understand, maybe I'm stupid, and the other students say, no, we didn't understand it either. No one understands it. It's Hegel, it's fine, or whatever. You lose some of that. So there's a lot, I think, of the motivation and a lot of the kind of, which in the short term you don't lose. The interesting thing will be in the kind of current context to see how do we manage to keep motivation over a long period. So at the moment, many students want to be engaged with the novelty of online teaching and seeing their lecturer's kitchen or whatever, or cat or whatever it might be, being involved in class. But I think over time, we're going to have to struggle to think, how can we keep students' motivation up? How can we keep students engaged over a period of time? And I think that's going to be challenging. I think that often will be around a mix of synchronous and asynchronous. So I think one of the benefits of the synchronous aspect, the live event aspect, is it's set time and a set day. Yes, that's hard for students with time zones and with other issues, but at least having some of those in it allows us to kind of provide some sort of ongoing, forward-looking kind of routine. And that's
sorry to cut across you. That's at my university, the sort of directive, and I mean, it's definitely a suggestion rather than an edict. But the idea is that we should try and replicate the times of the seminars that we were having face to face for students when we're going online, because just to provide a sense of normalcy or a sense of routine.
Yeah, absolutely. I can absolutely see the motivation in people kind of recommending that, because I think we often find, as we've done before, about the acre-long day of just all this time. How do we know when to do things, and rather than having this? And many of us now, students to an extent, certainly staff, will live by their kind of online calendar. It'll tell them when to do what when. And without that, it can be a bit kind of, this is a phrase used earlier, a bit adrift. So I think that for synchronous things, we can start to mitigate some of those difficulties by having some regularity. That, as I said, has limits with students in different time zones, students have other responsibilities, and students for whom the world has changed vastly recently, and so what was possible earlier in terms of days and time is no longer kind of feasible. But I think also the asynchronous learning materials that we produce can still have some regularity and routine to them. And that's why I talked about them not being excessively open, but time-bounded. And so if you give them 3 days to do an activity, or by tomorrow afternoon, everybody's made a short contribution, and then say, we'll be releasing the group's different artifacts you've all produced at this time, they'll be available afterwards, but you can have a kind of live event that if you miss it, doesn't matter that much.
Go on.
No, I was just kind of reflecting what you're saying about what the kind of other risks were about students and staff feeling in this kind of context that goes on. A lack of motivation, lack of kind of, if starting to feel kind of aimless or pointless and things. I think that's where the structure matters, but it might be about building in things that are slightly different. So you might say, okay, this is the model we're going to have most weeks. We're going to have a short synchronous lecture session or whatever, or a live chat discussion, and then we're going to leave a discussion board up for 48 hours. Here's the reading, here are the 4 questions, and then the tutor's going to provide a response to everything you all said on Wednesday afternoon, and you can look at it afterwards. I think you could build a model like that, and you could do it every week, and that would provide a kind of a model. But also, you could try and build in something that it's kind of things to look forward to. And I think one thing that I think we might look forward to is lecturers at different universities, because we're all using virtual software that is largely interoperable, or we can make fine versions that are, is it might be an opportunity for people getting their colleagues and friends and things to give guest lectures. So say, okay, for the next 3 weeks, we're doing it like this. But in week 4, I'm getting this lecturer to come in from Nottingham-Trent, and they're going to talk to you about this, and I'll be talking to their students. So I think there might be opportunities for academics from different universities to work with different students. There might even be opportunities for students
without the constraint of budgets. Without the constraints of budgets as well, David.
Absolutely, you haven't got to put them on a train. You haven't got to put them in a 5-star hotel like philosophers normally demand, or whatever it might be. Absolutely. So there might be some kind of creative thoughts about thinking we can have some different things. It might be, so if we would say doing something else to some of the philosophy you teach, that we can have a discussion session between 2 members of staff live. The students get to watch, but it's also recorded.
Okay,
and it might even be opportunity for different students to interact with each other. Sorry.
So there's a couple of good just good tips there, I think there. So we have I like the idea of the time bounded discussion forum. That seems good. I like the idea of a sort of the visiting lecture. That would be feasible, I think. And I like the idea of getting, rather than say live casting an event, I say live casting a lecture, live casting a tete-a-tete discussion on whatever topic people are dealing with. Yeah, so 3 really good tips there, I think, Dave.
I think for the last one of those, if say you and I were having a conversation about Heidegger or something dreadful, and a student, whatever it might be, how much I've got to say, really. But say we were having a conversation, you would hope that your students would be part of that kind of group of people listening to that and making comments. But so are my students. So the students perhaps would use a shared chat forum while the event was live. Yeah, so say you and I were discussing, say, Heidegger, and we could have a live chat forum we put online somehow, where students from both my class and your class are both asking questions. And then we might even put a discussion board up for 3 days afterwards where they get to talk to each other. So that's an opportunity for students to mix, especially if you've got small classes, and so maybe a limited number of super enthusiastic students, or the ones that need to create a sense of energy. You say, okay, we're now going to bring this cohort in, and they'll have the opportunity to chat with each other, and also they might bring different perspectives. So it's that sense of having occasional special events on it to make it think that you're putting something together rather than just trying to replicate the normal curriculum so that you don't get in trouble. But actually you're thinking, okay, what students are losing something from having a live event where you can't read the room and adjust your material. What can we do? We can't replace that. We can bring something else in and try some different ideas.
So just then to talk perhaps about, say, something like more specifically on synchronous forms of online learning and thinking about ideas of best practice surrounding that. So I'm going to ask you a question. Other than a ridiculous portmanteau word, what is a webinar?
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting word. It's awful. An ugly word, almost ugly as feed forward. A variety of other repulsive. Not that I think feed forward is a bad idea, just a horrible term. Anyway, thinking about webinar, which is also kind of grammatically ugly, what I've discovered from looking at how it's used is people use them very differently. So it's a term that almost can mean whatever different companies that are selling often and want it to mean. Often it's an online training course, live, but quite often it's a broadcast piece of content with some kind of interactivity built into it. So I think, and I've done things that I wouldn't have ever called a webinar, but actually thinking about could have been branded as such. So I've used tools I used to use previous institution like Adobe Connect, and could use Blackboard Collaborate now.
So Microsoft Teams or Skype
we
for
could
Business.
Use Microsoft Teams, absolutely. And what I found often quite effective in Collaborate and Adobe Connect and some of the others, and I'm sure the functionality is similar, is to have say it's a big class, so you can't have them all on screen, but to have maybe a video and audio stream of me in the corner, just to give a sense of the humanity to it, chattering away, but also a chat window open that everybody's in, and a kind of a whiteboard that might have PowerPoint on it. There might be a shared whiteboard that everyone can kind of comment on, or a space. If it's a scientific experiment, it might be a short piece of video or PowerPoint that takes you through the steps. So I think those kind of synchronous events are quite nice because I guess you get the benefit of someone talking. You can all put their headphones on. They can listen to me saying, right, we're all here. Today we're going to dissect Patrick's kidney, whatever, and in this box. And right, before we start, I'd like you all to kind of say what you think the major problem, the biggest risk is going to be in carrying out this experiment, and what do you think? And so you can have a kind of live chat and get to all of that. And then you can go back to the video where you're addressing them all for a couple of minutes. You can suspend the chat box or whatever. And then you can say, right, now we're going to watch this short piece of video on the main screen. I want you all to make some notes on bits of paper of X, Y, or Z and get them ready to type in the chat box afterwards. And you can set tasks in the PowerPoint, whatever it is. So I think those kind of events where they're a kind of mixed media approach, and most of the tools allow that.
I mean,
so
that's a face-to-face as well, isn't it, David? I mean, that's face-to-face teaching. You need a diversity of media and a diversity. My friend always says to me that we often think too much of a sort of a class, whatever format it takes, as one continuous thing, but it's usually quite broken up into beginning, middle, and end, and different sections in between. Absolutely,
I think if you have that kind of epiphany about face-to-face teaching, it's much easier to reimagine it in an online. So I think, so thinking of a lecture that I might give, or even a traditional style lecture, it's quite often broken. There'll be an introductory bit where it's quite interactive, where I'm asking people whether they've done the reading, how they are, back and forward. They'll be quite informal, and I'll be wandering about a bit. Students may or may not be interacting with me. And then I'll switch. It'll be quite different in terms of tone and approach. I'll be using the board, or I might be using the visualizer or with a book on it or something. So it'll be broken and they'll all be looking at that, not me. So a face-to-face class will be broken up into all sorts of elements, you're right. And the media won't just be me and my kind of like show of personality standing on the front of the stage waving at them the whole time. And I'll be using the board, I'll be using books, I'll be using quotes on a PowerPoint slide. So thinking about that, thinking how you segment a face-to-face session into such things, what easily translates into the kind of synchronous webinar type content as well. Okay,
so for you then, Dave, what has just worked for you, I guess, would be a good way of thinking about this in terms of segmenting an online seminar delivered by Microsoft Teams or Skype for Business or whatever?
I've tended, when I've tend to do that kind of online synchronous teaching, to do slightly more planning than I would normally do for a face-to-face class in terms of planning the structure. I'm not sure I still really believe that preparation's for amateurs in the way that I perhaps did when I started teaching. Something will come to me when I stand there. But so you might do some preparation for a face-to-face class, but a lot of that might be about the content. I'm not sure I still believe this idea that I used to talk about in relation to being. It might be. I have a series of quotes. But I tend to think that in that kind of session, we talk about a synchronous webinar type context, I'll probably do slightly more planning. I might even have some notes jotted down on a bit of paper and say, okay, this is going to be 50 minutes. I'm going to do 5 minutes of this. Then we'll do this for 10 minutes. So I've got almost like a lesson plan. And that will help me keep my timings throughout it and say, okay, after 5 minutes, I'm going to show them the 3 quotes. Then we're going to switch the chat box and we're going to spend 10 minutes. Some tools allow you to put big groups into smaller groups, like subgroups. Yeah. And there are various ways to achieve that. So you might say, right, and then we're going to put into these 3 subgroups to discuss the 3 quotes, and they're going to prepare a paragraph each to show the others and they're going to all email it to me, and I'll integrate it with the PowerPoint and stick it on there at the kind of 25 minutes point. And then we're going to give them all a chance to read each other's quotes while they also go and make a cup of tea. So we're going to have 5 to 10 minutes kind of break, stroke, catch up to where we all are. And then it will enable their audio and ask them all to say what they think or whatever it might be, or depending on the size of the class. So I would say for a session like that, I would hope to really segment it into a number of pieces and then have some kind of culmination at the end. So they will drift off. That culmination may be sort of my reflections on the work they've done and try and summarise some of that. And that might switch from more broadcast mode for the last 10 minutes, where I will sort of talk about, but also will tell them what's coming next, that I look forward to seeing the next Wednesday at whatever time it is, and previewing the next session and telling them what to be doing in the meantime. Saying, right, now you need to go back to look at the virtual learning environment, get back on Moodle, and you'll see I'll put some tasks on for you. And I think the interesting thing about asynchronous learning and tasks is that you may still want to have a sense of time by revealing them only at certain periods. You can do that. You can preset all that with Moodle, or you can just add them yourself at set times. So you might say, well, the materials for next week's class will be released tomorrow morning at 9. I'm not sure that introduces a massive sense of theatre and drama to the course, but depending on how amazing your materials are. But at least there's a kind of sense of pace and regularity again. So each week's classes, the Thursday at 9 is when the materials are released, and then you can start if you want to. So I think a session that's split in those kind of ways gives students a sense of what's going on and not just feeling like they're staring at the screen while you bang on about something.
And then how do you deal with, how does a staff member deal with, say, something like behavioural issues, or trying to keep everybody on point to see if everybody's paying attention? I presume, as you've already alluded, that would be more difficult in the webinar format.
Yeah, it is, because you're doing it live and you're trying to kind of, and often for staff, it's not something they're used to doing. Most tools will allow you to open a private chat message with the student at any one time. So you get to the student who was just dominating the discussion.
Tone it down a bit, yeah.
Yeah, just for the to say, your contributions are amazing, it's really good, but some of the other students are a bit slower than you. Not a bit slow, people wouldn't use that phrase. But some of the other students are kind of a bit more reticent to speak. So can you kind of hold your comments back for 30 seconds at the start of one of the question or whatever it might be? Technically, of course, you can block people often from periods of time. You can say, kick Patrick out the room for half an hour, a more drastic step. But the solutions might be there, and we might be able to get quite good at using them and quite subtle and nuanced at trying to having a word with students. But we won't be like that straight away. Many of us who've taught for a long time will be able to handle situations in class like that because we're really experienced. We'll have learned how to do it over decades, and it's really hard. So I think we can't expect the staff will learn how to do that in an online context overnight. So I would hope that staff would get some guidance from their universities or from the kind of learning teaching staff from their universities, and also would feel they can go and ask somebody. So I've set this up like what you recommended I do, but actually I'm finding two students just use a chat box to flirt and argue, whatever it might be, and everybody else feels it's kind of weird and has got to, what do I do about it?
So not so unlike face-to-face teaching then.
Well, yeah, but you know what to do about it in face-to-face teaching. You'd give them a look.
The look, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you've got one at your disposal. But it's harder to give people the look online, especially because it's harder than looking at a kind of webcam screen anyway for many people, because they don't know what to do with their eyes, and they can see themselves and they start to freak out and things, not surprisingly. So I think where we know what to do about those situations, I think face-to-face, we might well do, we've got to learn all that anew online. So I think we need to be relatively kind of patient with ourselves and think my teaching is not rubbish just because I didn't deal with that thing perfectly. I'm learning new things all the time, and actually we'll get there with things like that. And tools allow us to. It's just going to take a while. I think universities must also think that this must be really aware just how new this is to all their staff, and extend quite a lot of kind of patience to their staff, thinking it's not them being at home isn't them working less hard. Just because they're not on campus scurrying about doesn't mean that the fact that they're able to sit in their kitchens with cups of tea while they're teaching isn't them working up, because it's incredibly taxing. Almost everybody I've met in university lecturing is really, really wants to do a good job. No one wants to be rubbish at teaching. Everyone really wants to do a really good job for their students. And people I can talk to people kind of online and kind of colleagues, and they're working really hard to make these sessions good. So I think universities have to kind of think that, although it might seem that people are kind of having an enforced holiday in their own homes or whatever, people are anxious and stressed, and it's a difficult time, and they're really, really working hard to make this good for their students. So there needs to be kind of an appreciation of that on behalf of universities, and there's some kind of decency according to staff and their attempts to make student learning carry on happening, even with everything that's going on.
Okay, so is there anything else you think you'd like to add about this, given so many colleagues are grappling with this, and we're in a new, very, very unprecedented situation? We're in a crisis, basically a global pandemic right now. Is there anything else we should be thinking about?
I think for university teaching staff, I think we need to, as I was saying about universities extending a certain amount of consideration towards their staff, we need to also extend that towards our students. And some of our students will have anxieties and pressures and worries about this pandemic that we don't know about, and they're quite within their rights not to tell us. So if some students don't seem as interested in normal, in my really exciting ideas about the study of early Buddhism, that might be because they're worried about some really, really urgent, pressing things now. So I need to kind of slightly perhaps dial back on my impatience towards students not having the motivation that I think they ought to have. And I think that's also with colleagues. If colleagues aren't getting back by email or on things as promptly as I might have come to expect them to, that might be because they're dealing with a huge problem, because they're trying to sort things out for elderly relatives. They've got, so I think it's
childcare.
Absolutely, their children are at school and more, or they're kind of having to negotiate all kinds of things they put in place to make their lives work that actually turn out to be quite fragile and precarious. So I think when that kind of extending a level of kind of kindness and compassion to colleagues and students is going to be hugely important, and allow us to kind of carry on the business of learning with students effectively, but not in such a way that kind of makes people feel excluded if they can't give their all to it. And they'll, actually students will able to give what they can to it, just a staff roll.
I suppose crises and threat emergencies, they draw us together a little bit as well. I think I've certainly noticed that in my institution. There's because we're all doing something new all of a sudden. There's a bit more esprit de corps all of a sudden, I think, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think staff are all finding themselves in the same boat, in separate houses, but all in the same kind of metaphorical boat of trying to work out how to do this stuff together. And so I think that is allows for a certain amount of equalisation amongst people where none of them feel like they're the super expert. Everyone's kind of struggling. Everyone's trying to find a way. And I've certainly seen lots of emails splashing about between groups of people saying, hey, I just discovered this new thing you can do on Teams or whatever it might be. That button that I've never pressed. So I think staff are kind of finding that absolutely. And I hope some of that transmits itself to students as well. The sense, look, we know things are really hard for you. We know things are really difficult. We're doing our best to give you a really interesting experience, do something really exciting for you, especially for some people who can't tear themselves away from social media and rolling news. Many of us find it hard to do. The chance to come and spend a couple of hours with a tutor getting excited about Greek philosophy or whatever it might be, that is a real gift to them as well, not just for the educational purposes, but for the terms in terms of break from that sense of constant disease and anxiety that things like rolling news mainline into us.
Okay, Dave Webster, thanks for helping us teach through the apocalypse.
That's good. I'm sure when we get back post-apocalypse, we'll have a whole new range of teaching issues to face.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
All right, pleasure.